interrogate and influence the different platforms that are there for the youth, and also to look at the treaties and the policies, affirmative policies that have been put across in all these regional countries, because you will find in all these countries the affirmative actions that have been taken by the government to ensure inclusion, but unfortunately I think there's lack of political goodwill to make sure that that works. So we really need to look at this deeply. Just before I sit, I really want to acknowledge first the support of our partners, Open Society Foundation, without whom which this study would not be possible. We want to thank the members of the technical reference group. A big thank you to Mr. Job Ogoda, who was very instrumental in the conceptualization of this study. We want to thank Mr. Gilfred Asimaha, Professor Collins Odote, Mr. Matthias Humpe, Mr. Njonjo Mue, and Dr. Musambai Katumanga, who are very instrumental also in the conceptualization of this study. They participated in the validation process, so we want to thank them because their feedback was very critical for the final output of this research. We want to thank our respondents, we will not disclose them, and the researchers who participated in making sure that this study was a success. Thank you so much for joining us. As we move forward with the program, we hope that we'll have a constructive discussion, and karibuni sana. Thank you.
That very profound introductory remarks that you've offered us. We've altered the program slightly for eloquence and flow, and what we suggest to do is to first of all go into the brief video that has been prepared to bring us into the study before we do the panel, and then we will have the keynote remarks from the guest speaker, George Kegoro. And Ben and his team tell me they are ready, so we will straight go into that. I don't know about the lighting, you know better. And once we are done with the video, then we will resume the panel and then move to the next stage. Thank you so much.
The whole objective of the study is to establish the nature, level and manifestations of access to public contracts and tenders by people in Ethiopia, Kenya, South Sudan and Uganda in relation to their ethnic identity or other factors. The study looks at the trends in doing business with government, the nature and trend of resource distribution, and the place of young people to access such opportunities. The selected case studies looked at specific sectors to do an in-depth analysis of the complexity of public rent distribution and ethnic patterns. Country case researchers used literature review, interviews and focus groups discussions to understand these trends and make recommendations. Although this was an interesting and timely research, it has its limitations. Researchers experienced challenges like availability of data, willingness of individuals to be interviewed, and difficulty accessing public documents, related to the study. Do weak institutions enable the rise of strong men, or institutions are deliberately weakened by strong men? The late Prime Minister in Ethiopia, Museveni in Uganda, and Salva Kiir in South Sudan, all different versions of a strong man, played and continued a determinant role in terms of deciding economic rent allocation to different parts of the society. Under these men's leadership, public institutions are weakened and their followers rely on their instructions and awards to executors. Melis's system favored the Tigrayans and Salva Kiir's favored the Dinanka. Uru favored Kikuyu. Civilian institutions rarely control or investigate where these resources have been allocated. Weakening of such institutions, either by assigning leases or sharing benefits, is a common tool of accountability. Ethnic-centered power and resource brokers, call them in Uganda, brokers in Ethiopia, these individuals keep the resource and information moving within the system. Many are not full-time brokers and have daytime jobs and are connected to the individual in power, but they make sure that different power systems within and outside the state are connected and resources are moving to the intended groups. Many times, they are as powerful as the political appointee due to their deep and complex web of networks. Global linkage, domestic enablers. All cases that are connected with government and in the distribution of resources have international partners or clients contract from the state. Brokers in Ethiopia were closely connected to public officials associated with METEC, bring in these international organizations, seemingly giving a very exclusive and unique service to the state that cannot be catered by any actor in the country. Western countries created an enabling environment for Museveni to consolidate his power by overlooking his informal connections to international companies who pay access to public resources. Political appointees, civil servants with a military background, soldiers converted to public servants. The Ethiopian, South Sudan and Uganda case study demonstrated that there is a strong link between former soldiers or liberation fighters and those who dominate, direct or control the economy. This trend manifested in two major ways. Either former military leaders drop their uniforms and become civilians occupying significant positions in government, or they influence the economy and use their connections in government to enrich themselves. Youth have been both benefactors and victims of exclusion. In all case studies, youth are a key majority and unemployment remains a challenge. It was difficult to conclude that all youth as a class were excluded from those rent distribution structures. Tigray youth in Ethiopia, Kikuyu youth in Kenya, and the Dinka in South Sudan benefited from the system due to their ethnicity, while other ethnic groups were excluded from accessing these resources. The economic resource distribution usually follows the country's political settlement, and the ethnic group that plays a dominant role co-opts young people in a mutually beneficial relationship with their vote and favor in return for economic opportunities. Poor management of ethnic, diet and public resources. The challenges of all case studies is that they are all ethnically diverse and their resources are poorly managed. All case studies show that public resource belongs to the government of the day, and to get economic benefits is a strategic to work closely with the dominant ethnic group or its affiliates. This research has its own limitations. The study used the exclusion framework to look at public awards and ethnicity in specific sectors in the selected countries. The data collected will need to include more case studies and in-depth investigations for a wider conclusion. Respondents and informants were particularly alert when sharing information, and official public documents were difficult to access, so most of the desk review reference is based on information available to the public. The Ethiopian case study looked at the interaction between power and resources under ethnic federalism. It used the horizontal inequality framework to understand inequalities among culturally similar groups. Two main sectors were chosen for the Ethiopian case study are infrastructure and military industry complex. The following trends of public resource and ethnicity: party memberships, especially in Addis Ababa, being incumbent party, can give favorable access to ethnic identity. The dominant ethnic group in political space has the power to resources to his or her own ethnic group. Proximity to political power. Close families or relatives to those in power and who command public resource get more contracts and favorable deals. A promise to share resource benefits. Even if individuals are not related through ethnic identity or are not party members, their initiation to share benefits from public contracts can also get them the opportunity. Most public contracts take a legal form and are formalized and legalized systematically by manipulating information in order to exclude competitors and include favored companies. The Kenyan study focused on political economy of inclusion and exclusion by examining the ethnic patterns of access to major public contracts, tenders and appointments to public service in Kenya. The study focuses on sectors where the government of Kenya has over the years allocated and spent more budgetary funds, namely health, education and transport. In terms of Kenya's political economy, the connections between those who have the power to distribute resources and those who get government tenders and contracts in public depend on two issues. A. Economic resources, money to pay for political parties, common where contracted campaigns and later are rewarded with public tenders or government appointments. This is why politics engages in budgeted corruption. Political patronage is also manifested in corruption dealings that underline lobbying for contract appointments. 2. Ethnicity. In Kenya, companies and individuals from the Kikuyu and Kalenjin ethnic communities are the largest beneficiaries of government contracts or tenders and senior government appointments. All the presidents of Kenya have alternately come from the two ethnic communities. The three presidents are Kikuyu and 2 Kalenjin. For one government or get appointed to senior government positions, they need connections with people in power who control distribution of resources and key public appointments. One key respondent declared that Kenya was in fact a connection-based and not a competence-based economy. There have been an increase in the number of public servants prosecuted and even convicted due to corruption in the country. The 2021 report revealed that the number of cases prosecuted in court rose from 132 in 2019-2020 to 146 in 2020-2021. While the number of convicted officers rose from 8 in 2019-2020 financial year to 12 in 2020-2021. This has implications on the youth and access to government opportunities since they lack funds to bribe and are excluded by the hardened and sophisticated graft criminality by officers in some public institutions. Contracts have been used as proxies in these corruption schemes. For instance, there is a growing trend in Kenya where government officers and politicians use their children, the youth, to register companies for contracts or open accounts are deposited. A key example is former governor of Kiambu, Mr. Ferdinand Waititu, who was accused by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission (EACC) of receiving kickbacks through his bank accounts and accounts of companies associated with him, his wife Susan Wangari Ndongo, and their daughter Monica Njeri. Top government officials often use proxies to engage in business with government. One respondent revealed that most preference and reservation schemes restricted tenders in tendering do not help those who are youth, women, and persons with disabilities. The Procurement Opportunities AGPO scheme, 30% of government tenders are reserved for special interest groups, namely youth, women, and PWDs. However, all respondents affirm the scheme has been infiltrated, where government officials and politicians use their children, relatives, and friends to register companies and get these reserved tenders. It established that ethnicity is not the only basis of exclusion during appointments, but ability to provide bribes to people in power or also determine the access to government tenders. Kenyans of currently the Chinese are doing huge business with government. The Chinese have to the input not because of ethnicity, but because they have resources and the capital. It is argued that some members of the Mali community have used to secure contracts and appointments in the government, dishonorable marginalization ethnically and politically. The South Sudan case explores exclusion and ethnic patterns of access to major public and in South Sudan by particularly looking at selected sectors of aviation infrastructure, bridge infrastructure, and energy infrastructure and road infrastructure. As indicated in the study, public contracts in South Sudan are accessed through networks of friends and relatives, such as nephews or cousins and brothers or sisters close to the contracting ministry entity or the office of the president. Even so, some respondents allege that the people of South Sudan are deprived of accessing any tenders and contracts because they are blocked and not transparently awarded to people. Contracts are conducted at back doors. Experience from women civil society leaders indicated that the contracts of any infrastructure are neither transparent nor accessible to the public. The government keeps such contracts hidden, and we believe they are selective in awarding such contracts. They are making the government acting on bias and corruption basis, as the people do not have any knowledge or access to such supposedly public service information. It is further asserted that the president's circles have many projects on their hands, road, bridges and aviation construction projects. As a result, a pattern has now emerged with some of these contracts are often subcontracted to I know my allies, my relative and my friends chain. It was also noted that some of those who are given the subcontracted projects are only motivated by getting their share of the loot, but offer poor product. After all, my interest is in the money. Not only, but also an example cited here is the previous solar installations and the city street lighting system funded through China aid. Despite the South Sudan Development Plan SSDP targets, the energy sector situation has not changed much since pre-independence. The ethnic dimension of contract access and employment has led to the widespread perception of Dinka dominance in government institutions. The involvement of the Dinka and Nuer in the SPLA side of the War of Independence resulted in better access to contracts and employment opportunities for Dinka and Nuer people over the other ethnic groups. A key example can be seen from the ARC's dealings with the public face in Taiwan. ARC belongs to the family of President Kiir, who happens to come from the Bahr el Ghazal, and 70% of ARC employees come from that group of people, the Dinka. And JEDCO, with its public face of Ezra from Eritrea, as indicated by many, ideally contracts are awarded based on professionalism and experiences and what the procurement and disposal of assets laws laid out, including other relevant legal frameworks and policies. It was also noticed from the study that contracts is considered a reward for those who stood with the president during two conflicts in 2013 and 2016. The study established that those having access to public contracts are rewarded due to their far-reaching participation in ethnic mobilization and actualization of forms and functions of the ethnic institution. As the study indicated, those who stood with the president in defending his power were given the privilege. Now, it is time to reward them with such contracts. In Sudan, scholars have highlighted that elites have manipulated conflict for their strategic gains. In a short time, the Jiang Dinka Council of Elders JCE became one of the new decision-making structures in South Sudan. It can be stated that these public contracts are predominantly awarded to those whose relatives are in senior government positions. It could be said that awarding of public contracts is done based on technically know who are supposed to technical know-how. Only there is currently no clarity on how tenders are conducted for the above contracts. The Ugandan case looked at ethnic patterns and exclusion in the oil and construction sector. Relationships exist in structures, and these relationships and structures have names: patriarchy, patronage, patrimony, colonialism, underdevelopment, etc. A local elite is a combination of powerful global and local elites into one unit that directs the control and distribution of resources in a country to the disadvantage of citizens down the social ladder, general citizenry, including the youth. In addition to the elected government, there is a shadow state and deep state that makes decisions on resources without needing to revert to the voters. A minority of young people may occupy these spaces too. All financial initiatives to relieve poverty are subject to political transactions. Some of the initiatives are to be found in Western Uganda alone. Regarding oil in Uganda, jobs and contracts are accessed through primarily ethnic considerations, but also through ethnic plus professional associations and education and training. Selection is made around sponsorship for higher education abroad. Lower quality education that may not lead to a supervisory role is provided for the rest inside the country. Opportunity for road construction is beyond the reach of the youth, as those opportunities are advertised internationally. Corruption money does not resolve the problem of inequality even in the president's ethnic area. Uganda's education sector, which is one of the most important domains for the youth, has very little linkages to policy and business. Ethnicity is not as important as patronage for the overall purpose of resource repatriation to the global domain. The president needs people who help him to do the repatriation more than he needs his tribesmen in the jobs. The latter will have to serve the interest of the former. The neoliberal business ethic has to be revisited. Environment for young people to thrive beyond education is urgently needed. Corporate for the youth should be part of a national development plans. For the youth has very little linkages to policy and business. Ethnicity is not as important as patronage for the overall purpose of resource repatriation to the global domain. The president needs people who help him to do the repatriation more than he needs his tribesmen in the jobs. The latter will have to serve the interest of the former. The neoliberal business ethic has to be revisited. Environment for young people to thrive beyond education is urgently needed. Cooperatives for the youth should be part of a national development plans.
have done a wonderful job. And even if you didn't have the opportunity to read the whole of the report, this summary really captures the essence of what the research study has managed to bring out as the findings. So we now want to do the panel, and I was consulting a little bit, and we feel that it would be best if we get each of the panelists coming forward and sharing their part. Before then we can put them together to see what kind of questions that we can be able to field to them. We are going to take them one by one, and we will be discussing with each of them in terms of the areas that they have dealt with. But where is Winnie Wanjala? Munira? Okay. Yeah, before Winnie comes, maybe we can just get all the panelists to come in front now, then we can see how to take the session. Let me start with James Boboya from South Sudan. Let's welcome James. I am told that this is practically his second home, Kenya. Welcome, James. All of us in this region, we feel at home wherever we find ourselves, but we always check what words we can say and which ones we cannot say. I'm going to introduce James in a little bit more of detail. Let me invite Ms. Dalaya Ashnafi from Ethiopia. Please welcome Dalaya. Thank you very much. Let's now invite Mr. Richard Mugisha. He was here a short while ago. Is he coming? Yeah, okay. So as we wait for Richard to come back, let me have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Wilfred Muliro Nasongo. Welcome, Mr. Muliro. Let's welcome you with a bit of confidence. And when Richard comes, I'll welcome him to the panel. As I said, I wanted to introduce the panelists a little bit so that we understand who is here. Dalaya is an independent researcher and a political economy strategist, and she holds a master's in an MA degree from King's College, London. And for the last 10 years, areas of study and experience has focused on political economy in relation to security and development. And after moving back to her home town and country, Addis, she has worked as a chief of party for a USAID-funded research implementation program. And we are very, very happy that she is really one of the panelists who have gone through the report, and will be helping us to, unpack the research study so that we are able to understand a lot more in terms of the content and the direction that the political economy in these countries is taking. Richard is here now. Welcome, Richard. Please help me to welcome Richard. When we were inviting him, he was not in the room. Richard has a wide experience working with refugees seeking asylum in the UK, women's political participation in the East African region, leadership training for Uganda young women, and the philanthropy in the East African region. He attended universities in the former Soviet Union, the UK, and Uganda. Also a BA in modern languages and MA in development studies, and is currently doing a doctoral degree dissertation level now in philosophy at the University of South Africa, and he will be helping us in a great way to unpack this study in we are very, very happy that, Richard, you found time to be on the panel today. James, as I said, is a scholar of practice in international development management, governance, and social policy. He gained his experience in South Sudan, Somalia, and Somaliland, apart from Nairobi and the United States of America, where he engaged in extensive organizational development, governance, human rights, and sustainable development work. And he has also worked for more than 18 years in program development and project management, evaluation, policy analysis, and research. And he has actually spearheaded a number of studies and projects. And so we are very happy to have this team here today to be on our panel. And what we are going to do, Winnie Wanjala and I, is that we are going to engage the panelists so that they can, bring out and unpack the study for us. And then we can be able to engage in a question and answer afterwards. And so, I don't know, Winnie, where we start from. Probably we start from the Honorable Lady from Ethiopia, by the very fact that, she's the only one on the panel. And my bias in favor, my bias in favor of the leadership of women in all circles, including the intellectual circles. So I'm consulting my technical people, and they are encouraging that the diagrams here so that they can be able to project, because there is also quite a number who are online, and they want to be part of the process of what we are going to do here today. So the day as you come, really we are requesting that you help us, having gone through this research study, help us to do 2 or 3 things. First is to help us to understand whether this is a regional trend, and in unpacking this inequality and the political economy of how government appointments and the contracts are awarded, we would love to understand how then ethnicity, among other factors, is playing and is being instrumentalized in this kind of work. But the second part of that is to try and understand what then the consequences are in the various countries in terms of the governance, peace and security and stability, especially on how it impacts on young people, who are the majority. And we know that we Africans enjoy what we call the youth bulge, but it has now, developed aspects of it and perspectives of it around youth, which impacts security. And what recommendations do you make then for those of us in advocacy, in human rights, in good governance, in terms of setting the agenda going forward? So I know it's quite a bit, but you are more than equal to the task, and we would love to hear from you what you take from this report in unpacking it. Thank you so much. Let's welcome Dadai.
Hello everyone. Thank you for having us, and also thank you for I think appreciating and recognizing the importance of the interaction between politics and resources, which I think is missing in many spaces in the African political debate. So my understanding going through the report is we don't start the debate from a youth debate or a women debate, but we start the debate from understanding the interaction between politics and resources. I think that's one of the major trends that the report tried to see. So, different types of government in Africa, particularly in East Africa, Ethiopia. In 1991, Ethiopia introduced multilingual ethnic federalism in order to address grievances of different ethnic groups. So the idea was there was ethnic suppression and exclusion before 1991. So the system putting forward is supposed to empower these ethnic groups, not only economically, but also to recognize their presence within the state, their culture, their language, and also to empower them to own their own resources and regions. So when the system was introduced, the idea is, okay, now there will be more, social justice, economic justice. There will be a fair play in distribution of economic resources. But I think in the past almost 30 years now, including the reform, but before 2018, Ethiopia went through a lot of challenges, as you know. Starting from 2015, there was grievances among different parts of the society that, there was economic injustice, and a certain group was taking and controlling resources of the state for its own advantage. So I think a lot of that was discussed tries to assess trends in terms of political and economic rent distribution. So I think the case studies that are selected have given us a highlight of how these distribution of economic and economic rent is actually manifesting in the specific societies. So looking at, for example, the specific sector that was chosen for the Ethiopian case, which is construction. Construction had one of, I think it's also noted in the report, that it had generated one of the highest rents because it was one of the areas where the government was putting in resources. And that was quite important because you follow the resources and then you try to see where that resource is going. So as we've seen in the case studies in the report, I think these exclusions were legalized, systemized, and to benefit the specific groups. Within this case is a specific group, the Tigrayan ethnic group. So the report looked at within the construction sector and also the other case study related to the military complex, what methods were being used in place to channel economic benefits. The interesting thing is, so in Ethiopia before 2018, there was what we call, a sustained or a dominant political settlement. That means, we knew who was dominating and why and what resources were being used, and it was very difficult to challenge that. So for quite some time, although individuals and people felt like they were excluded, there wasn't really a framework in place for them to analyze how that was done. I think that's why the political economy analysis for advocacy groups such as Information and other organizations will be quite important, because in other language this will be a governance issue, but it's more than a governance issue. It's actually about unpacking the different layers that exist within governance issues. So paying attention to individuals who are in power, their connections or their middlemen, and how they've been using that resources to benefit themselves, I think has been quite important, bringing us closer to understand, to solving the challenges of youth, women, and other groups that are excluded. So the interesting thing is, not only in Ethiopia, but when you go through the other case studies, is one thing we know for sure, and one thing we can't get rid of, is we have diverse ethnic groups in the region. I think that's very important. Many people try to see it as a problem, but that by itself is not a problem. That is something, diversity is something that we have within these communities, within these societies, and that's something we can learn to appreciate. How that diversity is managed and how that diversity is manipulated by elites is something that is the challenge itself. So we saw that in Ethiopia, Uganda, South Sudan, and Kenya, very diverse communities, and all of them have either historically justified grievances or historically justified military experiences that they feel like they have, paid a price, they have sacrificed to come, for the peace of the country or for the consolidation of the country. So most public resources and rents generated from these resources are justified for them to use in whatever way that they want. So that's their way of distancing themselves from accountabilities and check and balances. So the transition from military institutions or military actors into what we call civil servants has been quite difficult. In fact, the trend shows that it hasn't really happened. The individuals might have, changed their uniform, they might have changed the way they presented themselves, but the thinking in terms of leadership and distributing resources actually remains that there is a very strong sense of entitlement for public resources. The other interesting thing is, I think the report tried in the beginning is, okay, youth are excluded, especially for those actors working in civil society. Youth is something, innocent, something benign, these are, young people, they're innocent, they're looking for jobs. Going through the report, what you see is youth are actually the actors. They contribute to the perpetual of unfair distribution of resources, they benefit, but there are also other youth who are victims. So it's important to see the role of youth and contextualize the understanding of how we see youth within the political economy analysis and how they are used by elites or by politicians or by those who distribute resources for their own purposes. Now, discussing why they do it is another thing, because unfortunately staying close to public institutions and public politicians, it gives you protection. It gives you protection for resources, it gives you protection for other opportunities. So yes, youth have been using that as an opportunity as well. So I think that needs to be contextualized within each country and within specific case study, instead of saying, okay, I work for youth empowerment. There are already youth that are empowered, they are using their own connections and their resources. So we need to think about what that actually means in terms of our youth empowerment work. The other interesting thing with the regional trend is, so these domestic economies are connected to a global economy. So as much as we have strong, dominant local actors, we have actors that are connected internationally to businesses, to leaders outside of that specific region. So multilateral financial institutions, multinational companies who come in to invest have their own interests embedded within the domestic market. So interesting cases, in Uganda, in South Sudan, have shown us how public contracts are distributed not only to domestic actors, but international actors as well. So I think these are the general trends that we see. So the point is, what does this mean for policymakers, or what does this mean going forward? So I think within the framework of a bigger framework with the African Union and silencing the guns, it's very important to sharpen or innovate our understanding tools when it comes to understanding exclusion of youth and women and other groups. So what the political economy framework helps us to do is, it helps us understand first how the policies are made and where they are made and for whom they are made. So once we understand that, it will give us a very specific way for advocacy when we're advocating for social and economic justice. Fortunately, what we also understand is that most people who occupy public offices are there for a very short-term and tactical gain, which does not help the long-term economic development. So what we can actually advocate for is a sense of consistency in terms of advocating for economic policies that can benefit our constituencies. I think not dealing with youth employment or not dealing with youth, it's like they would say, it's a ticking bomb. It may not be today or tomorrow, but the youth bulge is coming, and it's something that we need to deal with. So I think including young people in these spaces and creating a very predictable, accountable, and transparent spaces where they can actually benefit from these resources, and also how they can give back, arranging ways of how they can give back to their community is very important. So the recommendation is not the obvious. It's not the so simple answer that says, you know, we need to have more accountable governance systems. So, I mean, we've already tried that. We need to come up with something much more specific. So first we look at, okay, how is the negotiation being made when it comes to politics and resources, and are youth represented there? And is ethnicity the only way that we look at when we're thinking of economic resource distributions? So only having, you know, a very simplistic dominant variable to explain how resources are being distributed, I think that explains our shortcoming. So it's very important to appreciate the different complexities that exist when we're talking about the interaction between, I think, politics and economic benefits. So this is what I would say. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Let's give a better appreciation. You know, as Dadaya went on, I kept asking, this is not for you, Dadaya. I wanted to ask, how do we deal with this thing of who comes to power and how then that is do we bring something, an innovation that talks about a collegiate presidency, you know, rotational presidency? What are some of these ideas? And I'm sure Muliro and the rest will think about some of these things down the line. That was very, very good, especially where you spoke about the African Union and our regional bodies. If we are going to silence the guns, if we are going to assess how policies are made and for whom the policies are made and who is the beneficiary, then that will help us, as you say, to go into looking at formulating more consistent policies that look at the long-term transformation of our economies and our countries. And I think that is a very, very profound, you know, a recommendation that you give us, those of us who are in policy, so that we can be able to avoid what you call the time bomb, the ticking time bomb, and we totally agree with you. So let me invite my colleague, Winnie Wanjala, to bring us the next panelist before we go to the next level.
Delaya, many thanks for that concrete summarization of the research. Sometimes it's a bit tedious to go through the whole report. We appreciate that. Mugisha, the standard has been set. You can only go. Yeah.
Shorter. Thank you very much, Winnie. You know, there's a lot of anger in the communities. Anger about the tribe which is eating. In Uganda, we talk about eating. You know, this tribe is the one that is eating. And Uganda has a smaller economy than Kenya. So what happens when someone eats for 40 years, he really annoys a lot of people. And the understanding is that his tribe is also eating. I really want to address that bit as well, because I come from the same place as the head of state. Actually, the same county. Now, I thought that we don't pay as much attention to structures when we talk about the youth as we pay attention to them when we talk about women. You know, all relationships exist in structures. You know, like when you say that marriage is an institution, What do you mean? You mean that there is a home. Now, the women studies have really smartened the understanding of patriarchy and the whole hierarchy about it. What about the youth? Isn't there a hierarchy? You know, paternalism. That's the thing. When the British were here, they used to say Africans are children, we need to educate them. When we became independent, our leaders said, the young people belong to the future, not here, not now. That's a very important structure that still exists. You see a young person trying to put up his hand and say something, and say, no, you are still young. What do you know? So paternalism exists in the economy. When you go to places like road construction, they say, we don't have a program for young people. We advertise road projects, opportunities internationally. If Ugandan youth are capable, let them also apply. But as you know, we have affirmative action for young people. We have an MP for youth. We have an MP for people with disability. We have an MP for the women. Now, there is no corresponding affirmative action for young people in the economy. In real economy, there's no young people. Actually, there's even no women. The hard economy is just for different people. There's this relationship between my head of state, and maybe your head of state, and the global actors. How powerful are they? What influence do the global actors have over my head of state? Is he the most powerful person in this country? Maybe no, because how did he come to power? Who brought him to power? Now we can say that there are powerful actors like big corporations which rig elections in an African country. Powerful corporations. I've heard people here talking about companies, the IT companies, which know how to deal with elections in this country. We also have such people. We know how Museveni came to power. We know even individuals from the global, how they supported Museveni to come to power in '86. Of course, he says, I fought. But how did he get the connections to IMF, to World Bank, to UK, and so on? Now, so that is a unit, by the way, and it's a tradition since independence. It has become a tradition. Every head of state to take power, he has to have people up there who influence him. Why? Resource distribution. You know, resource distribution. If you think about DRC, cobalt, coltan, copper, these are the minerals for the fourth industrial revolution. That's where we are going. Okay? And Congolese are going to keep dying in those mines as we head into the future. So for us, the future is already known. We are going to remain as poor as we have been. That's our future. It doesn't matter which country you come from. For us in Uganda, we have 2 factories of gold. Those factories don't pay taxes. When you go to URA, now they say Uganda is one of the leading exporters of gold. But when you go to URA, Uganda Revenue Authority, which collects taxes, doesn't show income from gold, tax revenue from gold. You may have heard about Ghana. No, Ghana now has defaulted, it can't pay. But what advice has it been given? 1, increase taxes by IMF. Increase taxes, that's 1. 2, cut spending, which means don't repair roads. Don't spend on health. Don't spend on education. 3, continue paying us. So when you say, I'm in trouble economically, they say, no, you go to your people and ask them to pay more taxes. And then you don't spend on their services. Okay? Then there is a shadow state, or what you call the deep state. In your country, when you elect a head of state, you want to hold him to account. And I love Kenyans. I worked in the Open Society, which has headquarters here, for 12 years. So I understand Kenyans. I love Kenyans when they are fighting for their rights. But you are fighting for the guy you elected, right? Sorry, you are fighting the guy you elected because you elected him. Or you are fighting a bureaucrat who was appointed in a formal way. But what about those other guys, like the son of the head of state, who controls a lot of things? You can't hold him to account because he belongs to a different state altogether. So there is a state within a state. One state is formal, and another state is informal. Now the informal state is very powerful in any country. So what do you want to do about the informal state? It is like the wife of the head of state of Uganda. Is the means of education, that's fine, but she also has links with Pentecostal church in the US. Now, what can we do about that? And these Pentecostal people, are they talking about heaven in heaven or heaven here? So what dealings do these people have in regard to resources in my country? Very difficult thing to deal with. So understand a shadow state, a point of corruption. And we have all done that. It is easy for us to go for the chicken thief, that's what we call them in Uganda. A small man that you know how to deal with. You can clamp on him. What about the big man? Now, when you look at the literature, there is this system called neoliberalism, which introduced privatization. That system has bred a lot of corruption. You need to look for the writings about it. That system of privatization. In Uganda, what happened? All government assets were given away to foreigners. And then the head of state also discovered that if I can give government enterprises to foreigners, why not myself as well? And his brother, and his other brother, and his sister, and his other relatives. So you have a network. So the whole system that was supposed to allow the markets to function efficient, the markets are supposed to be efficient, ended up being a corrupt mess. I think Kenya used to grow tea in those long ago years and coffee. So in Uganda, we also had huge coffee cooperatives. They built assets. Cooperatives is like all of us here. How we can come together and collect money over 100 years. And then you have houses in the country, in the capital city, you have industries, you have all this. Now, those cooperatives were dismantled, which means that we all lost our incomes. And then they were taken by individuals. Okay? About 120 houses, 120 other businesses owned collectively are now going away to an individual. He could be a Ugandan, he could be a foreigner. You could have a Ugandan fixer who knows which business is where. He hands it over. Okay? So we have written a constitution, and I know Kenyans also have written a constitution during our lifetime here. Constitutions are very good. They know the demands of the people. But the problem is the planning, economic planning, to realize the aspirations in the constitution. These things come from IMF, the economic plan, like poverty reduction papers. Those things come from IMF. Those things come from World Bank. The consultants who write them are from Columbia University, IDS, Institute for Development Studies, because why? The market. Who is the best? Even who knows the best English in which to write these plans must be an American or an Englishman. And what has happened? Okay? You have a conflict between the constitutional aspirations on one hand and the economic reality on the other hand. So there's another thing, when you read government documents, policy documents on the economy, they get it wrong from the word go. They said the problem in Uganda is the poor people. 67% of them, of the population, who exist outside the formal sector. They are informal, they are subsistence, they grow for the stomach only. They grow food and eat it. They don't contribute to the economy. In addition, they produce many children. That is the problem. Why is Uganda poor? Simple. You have over 50% of us just eating, producing and eating. Now, what does that mean? It means work hard to include these people into the formal sector, which may also mean take away their land, actually. Why are you sitting on this land and growing food and eating it? Why don't we mechanize? Why don't we irrigate? Why don't we modernize farming? Why don't we produce for large scale? Why don't we export? Especially if a community that does not bring dollars. If you don't grow maize to export to South Sudan or to Kenya when the Kenyans are happy to receive our maize, then you are no use, you're not. But actually, the understanding is very clear that there's a structure above which always siphons resources. It doesn't matter how many resources you produce. We discovered copper in 1924 in Uganda. All that copper was extracted and finished, and they want more, and we are still poor. So it doesn't matter how much we produce. It doesn't matter how many Ugandans are in the structure of the economy. Okay? So the conflict, please, between what the Constitution says and what the economy does on one hand, but also the understanding of why we are poor. Okay? So all youth initiatives, we are not short of youth initiatives in the country. We are not short of government producing youth livelihood fund, operation wealth creation, use this, use that. But the trouble is, some of these are presidential initiatives, so they are in State House. They are based in State House. Even those which are in the ministries, the permanent secretary in that ministry that runs a youth program has to be connected to State House under the shadow state. So at the end of the day, the only youth who get money is that one who is ready to transact. The head of state says, we shall give you this project, and by the way, you don't have to account. I give you this money, but at election time, you know how to mobilize for me, you know how to vote for me. So we have grown this very powerful youth mobilizers, because that's where the money is, at the election time. Okay. The responses that I have seen in the paper is beyond the anger that those people are the ones eating. Young people are saying, but we want cooperatives. Why do you think we are villagers? Why do you think all youth initiatives should be for rural, agro investment? Why don't you invest in technology? And why don't you fund 1,000 young people in one cooperative? Why don't you say, I have money for 1,000 young people in each county to invest in information technology? They talked about telemedicine, that you can invest in medicine as a young person. You can invest in science, technology, engineering, STEM, and math. Why is the youth initiative in State House? Why not in the bank? Let's set up a criteria, go to the bank, and get the money. So I think we need a civil society of a certain kind, I think, that knows how to combine these relationships at the global level and at the local level. If you don't relate these two, you're not going to get a lot. And I also thought that we need ethics in business. what does business ethic mean? Because when they say greedy young men, that's a very good thing, isn't it? This is a greedy young man, a go-getter, aggressive man. But the damage that privatization has caused, it has rewarded only those young people who know how to destroy structures, how to love money more than they love people. So how much can you kill for? How much money can you kill for? This, if you say, no, I want more, and this one as well, you say, no, I want more, and then this one as well. Okay, now I can do your job. That is what has happened to the social fabric. So there has to be an ethical approach to business. And for me, I really think there is a need for research and explanation that we are not poor. So when you say Ugandans are poor, 68% participate in subsistence, we need to redefine the policy understanding of poverty, that the hemorrhage of resources, continuous, in a global and local structure, has to be addressed. Because everybody who looks after 5 children, 8 children, is making an investment. If you look at police advertisement, and it says we want a strong man, healthy man, who speaks English, has A level, in Uganda it's A level, and so in the past the British used to say and tall, a certain height. Who produced those people? Did government add a penny? There is a certain woman, a certain auntie, a certain uncle, a certain father who brought up this strong man that you are looking for now. But when you recruit them, the money you pay them cannot allow them to go home for Christmas. So understanding young people again, there are those young people at the top level because they are connected in a certain way, as we've heard from Ethiopia. But then there are those other young people who are not connected. So if I come from your tribe and you are my boss, how are we eating, both of us? When you are having lunch, I'm at the gate, guarding you, because most of the army men come from Seventh tribe. Unfortunately, they are the ones who are ordered to shoot people on the street. Do you understand? The young men are instrumentalized. They are paid peanuts, and then they have to be the bad guys. They are the bad guys in the eyes of the public. And if you do that for 40 years, I'm telling you, the anger is really, really alive. Okay, my last point, very last, is that when you read the government statistics, UBOS, Uganda Bureau of Statistics, it is interesting. A lot of money goes to Western Uganda, where Museveni comes from. So the poverty levels are lower. But when you go to Western Uganda and look at the horizontal, from household to household, from community to community, the level of inequality at horizontal level is equal to the level of inequality in the whole of Uganda. This is what makes us a neo-colony. This is what makes us an underdeveloped country. So people who are eating are not people in Museveni's society. He's only using them. He is instrumentalizing his own. So basically, he's the enemy of his own people. He is instrumentalizing them as a way of protecting his own regime, regime longevity, to stay in power. But actually, he's rewarding people at the top who give him weapons, who give him international deals, who can decide that he should go, and he goes. Thank you very much.
Mugisha, thank you. You did not disappoint. At one point when you were talking, I was just thinking, kumbe Ugandans are just like Kenyans. Even the Kenyan youth have those bad manners during elections. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And especially the
excellent way in which he breaks down the structural and the systemic arrangement of this corruption, because he calls it corruption, and he explains that it has a global angle to it, which may even be more powerful and more preponderant than we actually appreciate. He not only says that, but brings out a very, very interesting way of looking at this in terms of how then the demands from the global system of cut spending, increased taxes, and so on and so forth, is to put these resources in a few hands, and these few hands are the ones who, accentuate the inequality, and how then this is connected to regime longevity and regime staying power. Thank you very much again, Richard, for that. We want to now invite, James. James, you've heard how the conversation has gone on so far, and of course, Dadaya started by saying that there is no one answer to what needs to be done, but she ended up telling us what actually we need to do, which was very appreciable. And again, Richard has given us a few concrete recommendations in terms of what then we ought to look at when we are looking for advocacy interventions. So, James, having read the report, in the understanding and trying to help us to unpack it from the South Sudan perspective, but also regional, when you went through the report, please share with us within a maximum of 10 minutes what you are seeing from this report, what we should take home, and what recommendations for the purpose of securing the interests of our people in the region, please.
Thank you very much. I'm happy. I'm not going to introduce myself because you've introduced me broadly. I'm just going to spend my 10 minutes to sort of discuss some of the things I've read from the report, and also bring in some of the global, regional, or the African perspective into this process. First of all, when Dalaya was talking, and also one of my colleagues was talking here, I was beginning to think about the team. The team says democracy, conflict, and exclusion in Africa. I would recommend that maybe we say democratic governance, conflict, and exclusion. The reason why I brought that up is because, from the two conversations and from my read of the report, there seems to be a problem happening now in South Sudan, in Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. It goes beyond to the African region in terms of how do we build effective state institutions, and how do we build effective state inclusive institutions. How do we make sure that the institutions that are framed in the name of a constitution becomes more efficient, that is able to, bring credibility to the public. And we've been hearing, of course, when I look at the South Sudan case, there's this concept about fragile state, conflict going on. I mean, in Ethiopia, there's a conflict. In Uganda, there's no conflict. Even if there's no conflict, but there's no stability in Uganda because there's a lot of issues. We talk about poverty, right? In Kenya, the same thing. Right? People are worried about how can they even survive, with the livelihood that they have, and how governments are supposed to provide, issues that could even help people in those countries to really survive. And also, there's this concept that I want to talk about is to do with well talked about in South Sudan. It's talked about severally in Kenya, the concept of state capture. The concept of state capture is probably one that promotes the longevity of governments or regimes in South Sudan, in Uganda. I've seen today in the news, Uganda, NRM is celebrating 37 years in power. Here, obviously, it's not a regime that stays long in power, but it's the tribe that stays longer in power, you see? So they promote one tribe, stay longer, but of course the regime goes, but still some of the characteristics that the next regime is promoting is obviously a promotion of the old regime. This is to do with the dynasty. People with too much money become dynasts, and they use that money to fund, activities of government. And obviously it's not only one tribe, maybe two tribes other than the rest. In South Sudan, we have 64 tribes. In this report, there's only two tribes that seems to be being pointed out, the Dinka and the Nuer. So what happens to the rest of the 62 tribes? What has happened? What has gone wrong? There's this concept also to do with the, in all these countries, and maybe all countries in Africa, there are policies that those countries have, there are laws that those countries have, there are practices that those people in government are promoting, there are processes, in terms of whether procurement processes or acquisition of services and something like that. We also have the structures, we have either formal or informal structures that are there to sort of either promote unity, promote issues that stay a political process in place. And the other aspect that I talked about is to do with the political and economic rent systems. They are either promoted through some of those issues. And we talk about, for example, the case of South Sudan as a new country, and there's evidence from the report that really tend to suggest that the networking between governments appears to only promote those key aspects of survival of those regimes in power. It's not about building the strong institutions. It's not about including everybody into the sharing of the state resources, but it's about which tribes are there that we can work with to promote our own being in power. And that is to do with the, contracts, right? In our reads of the public finance management, in all countries, there are public finance management processes. There's too much money going into those processes, but the too much money that people have to access, the normal access to the contracts. So what happens that we have public procurement and disposal of assets laws, but they get not to be utilized. There's no political will for most of these governments I've seen in terms of really thinking about including others. And I've seen evidence from the report saying, if you don't belong to those tribes, you must associate with those tribes in order to access, either contracts or the economic resources that are based in those countries. The other issue is to do with the resources, and I'm happy Uganda has started the oil drilling, I think, this week. Kenya hasn't. We don't know if Kenya is supposed to be having oil by now. I don't know what the dynamics is going to be by now, given the Kalenjin and the Kikuyu situation. The same thing happening in Ethiopia. The South Sudan has oil, and this oil finances 98% of the economy. And one thing that we've seen very clearly coming out is that there's a presence of international players, and in the South Sudan case, the role of China in the oil, So there's this project that the president came up with, they call it oil for roads. Now, the Chinese are given crude oil, and this oil money is put in China. No one knows how much money is there and how this money is actually utilized for road construction. At the same time, we saw in the report this ARSC, the Africa Resource company, which was linked to the president and is being spearheaded by a cousin of the president or a son of the president. And there's about, 2 days ago, they announced about $1.8 billion to be given to that company for constructing a road closer to the Ethiopian border. So that means too much money going into those structures. That particular community or tribe becomes the most, expensive and also rich strive. So what happened then when we talk about democracy and talk about participation in general? I think that's one thing that worries that. And I think one thing that I also want to say when I read this report is about the issue about human rights. How can we promote human rights, yet the people in power are not interested in this conversation about human rights, because human rights, it's supposed to be talking about, people all have access to maybe economic rights, social rights, political rights, cultural rights, and things like that. So I think that is something that probably I've seen from the aspects. One thing that also came very clearly, it's also about the sectors. I mean, we know when I came yesterday, I saw me being driven partly on a poor road, and then later on, I was elevated to a rich road. So this, you know, I don't know, they call them in Kenya the express highways, which is also coming up now in Ethiopia. It's coming up in Uganda. Roads for rich people, linked to particular tribes, you know. So this is the trend that it's a practical trend. But how do we work? And that's why I said, when I read this report, it provides me about a bit of worry, but it also gives me a lot of hope, because we are here in this hall. We have bulk of civil society in those countries that could be supported to begin having this kind of conversation about how do we discuss redistribution of power. And we know obviously there are moments where we will redistribute powers, you know. And I'm happy, to be honest with you, I'm very happy that the conversation about state capture and dynasty has begun, you know, it's working, right? In Kenya, people paid heavily because either they're associated with the dynasty group, they never got into power, or they associated with the state capture group. So if we promote that, if you are becoming a dynasty group or you're becoming a state capture group, your time will come. So I think that's important, that one thing that provides hope to that. Almost to conclude, I just want to say also, the other aspect is to do with the continuous marginalization and suffocation of youth groups. We know for sure that in all the aspects, given the Ugandan case, I grew up in Uganda, I studied at some point in Uganda. If you're tall with different nose and your body glitters, people talk about you, because you come from a region where the wealth is captured, you know. But there's also avenue of people saying that, you know, if we work together, we will, you know, get that narrative off the line. And I think this report gives us the evidence to begin talking about what are some of those essential issues that we really wanted to do. And I think one thing that also gives me hope is to do with the, you know, the structures of society. You know, if we don't go formally through the formal structures, we also have some of those informal structures. We've seen in South Sudan, working through the churches seems to be providing, you know, the hope for people begin talking about some of the issues. And I think that the concept people are talking about, speaking through to power. If we cannot talk through to power as marginalized youths, there are structures out there that can also talk through to power. And obviously they can use their Quran or the Bible to protect them in terms of, you know, being attacked by some of those institutions that appears to be attacked by the systems. So in conclusion, I just want to say that for us to really be able to continue discussing about some of those issues, I think if we in the region continue to discuss of how we can promote good governance, that is key. Because the role of civic education in terms of promoting good governance will make sure that people begin thinking about some of those essential principles of good governance and how they can promote those issues. Obviously, I know when people talk about good governance, in the South Sudan perspective, they like war. They said, if I have my AK-47, my good governance will be brought forward because I can go to the bush and then I create a war. The other issue to do with the strengthening institutions of governance is important. And I'm happy that working with institutions that are more elaborate in terms of, you know, promoting some of those ideologies of, you know, responsive institutions that are able to deliver, you know, services that are more, you know, tailored to the youth is important. And the other is to do with the, how do we bring the conversations about the marginalized youth and women, you know, to engage on some of those deeper governance structures is also important moving forward. And also the other aspect is to do with the role of parliament. We've seen in South Sudan, our parliamentarians appears to be doing a good job. I don't know what's happening in Uganda. I know obviously in the Ugandan case, MPs like to be in power because of you know, politics is a livelihood. It's about how much money do I get when I become a member of parliament. But obviously, it's important to also promote that aspect. And the other issue is to do with the, supporting civil society, as I said in the very beginning, because, it's only civil society that needs to be well funded. We had a conversation with people that we're dealing with institutions that have taken billions of dollars, and we're talking about civil society that is given $50,000 to influence the policy. That is not possible. If we can increase the support to civil society with at least a high level of funding, I think we can be able to rally and mobilize a lot of people to be able to talk about some of those issues. And other issues to do with also studying some of these policies that are more discriminatory, and how do we get, with our parliamentarians in terms of promoting the positive aspect of those policies, so that power and the resources become embedded in laws, policies, practices, systems, and structures. I think this is where I need to end, and thank you very much.
Boboya, thank you. You've brought out something that we are also passionate about as a... but many times we tend to divorce electoral justice and human rights, social justice. So maybe you've given food for thought. Is it time that we now need to start doing it as a multi-pronged approach? Thank you so much. You've used words that are very common to us: dynasty, state capture. Hasla ulikosa hapo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm just pounding my head even as we bring on Professor Muliro from the Technical University. There was a report a few years ago, Muliro, in South Africa on the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, which was very, very powerful and led partly to the removal of the former president of South Africa. This kind of study, how do we use it to build tools like those ones to bring about openness and accountability? So I think it's time, Muliro, to build on what is already coming forward, connecting the conversation as it goes on, so that we can be able to see how to, liberate our countries from this capture that is totally devastating. So please, Muliro, come forward for your 10 minutes. Let's welcome him. Let's welcome Muliro. Yeah.
So, thank you very much, Comrade Cyprian. Really, this is very hard for me because you said after every person, then you raise the bar. So with my height, it's like I'm looking at something up there. But then when they were speaking, I think I saw like my position as the last speaker will be more of raising debates. And you've already said that for me. It's like we are asking ourselves questions concerning this very, very timely topic. Timely in the sense that I was looking at the variables in this topic, democracy, conflict, exclusion, ethnicity, and you can see that they are interlinked. Actually, this is very good. Whoever came up with this framework, this is the current aspect of society that we are all grappling with. If you look at, you read the story from South Sudan, Ethiopia, the story from Uganda, Kenya, it looks like almost, when, comrade, you are talking about, it's like we are forlorn, in Kenya, the system has been set. It's either Kikuyu or Kalenjin. What can we do about that? Then the question comes, you look at democracy. Is democracy actually giving us the outcomes that democracy should give? Or is it the process of implementation of democracy that should be now may be tailored to suit the Kenyan situation. Because, you know, when Gisha was talking about the Kenya constitution and the rest, it looks like, you know, Kenya, we are, if it's rating in terms of implementing the liberal democracy, we are the laboratory of American ideas. We are very far. But then it doesn't give us the outcome that we expect democracy to give us. So we are, you know, you are looking at that when there is already a debate that should we have rotational presidents or should we have a collegiate system? So when you look at rotational, then you come back to the idea of ethnicity. If we are talking about rotational, then it means we acknowledge the presence of ethnicity. What will we base on to rotate? Then we will say, because a Kikuyu has been a leader, then it is the time for a Luo, or it is a, then we are going back to that ethnic acceptance. And I think, I'm not saying this because of negativity of ethnicity, but it is the basis that is already there that we run by. Or should we go and say that the vote of Winnie should not be equal to the vote of my clan's people in Lodwa, who have not gone to school, have not been exposed to what is democracy. They don't know why they are voting. So that now we look for voters for other Kenyans, you know, collegiate. We will not consider ethnicity or will not consider capture. So those are the two things, Cyprian, I was thinking about as I was coming. But then, you know, it's like, are we, that's why I believe that it is very timely, this topic. Are we so captured, you know, looking at the Dinga, looking at the Kikuyu, looking at the, he just told me that the Baganda were actually controlling the economy, and when Museveni came in, then the Western now is changed. Looking at the Tigray, but the Tigray, I think there is, it doesn't match the pattern I'm trying to develop. That these were the minority. We expected the Oromo to be the one doing what is happening in Kenya. So it is a system that takes us back to the thinking of the colonial structure that was already there, and our leaders are using it to perpetuate themselves on power. It worked for the colonialists, you know, and divide and rule, entrench yourself. So we continue. In fact, there is a statement that, at least, you know, we sometimes teach these things, that they believe in the colonial thinking that most of the communities, and this is a question I'm raising to the group here, that most states in Africa that are mostly led by the dominant ethnic community are more stable than those that are led by the ethnic minority. And people keep on quoting, they say when the Tutsi are there, Rwanda there was a problem, Kenya is doing well because the majority have been holding all through the 40. We have not had those serious conflicts. You look at Ethiopia, the minority Tigray, now we had conflicts internally in that case. But, you know, that's why there is that very serious link, democracy, conflicts, exclusion, and ethnicity. But my forte here, I think I was told to literally read the part on Kenya, and I think the reason why they chose those sectors, it makes a lot of sense in Kenya here, that if you look at the health sector, we have just come out of, they call it what, mafia scandal. Those are areas that have a lot of scandals, health, transport, education. We have come out of KEMSA, you know, the linkages between those in power and the contracts in health. You look at transport, my friend Boboya, you are right. The road for the poor and the road for the rich. But then at what cost? When you look at SGR, I remember when I saw George, then I remembered, maybe he could not remember that. We spent some time back. I think you are in, it must be ICJ, then yes, there was indeed, there was, I was associated with Africom. And the idea was to move along the proposed SGR and talking to communities, telling them not to sell land and resist the SGR. Because at that time it was a corrupt system, we thought so. And so the transport SGR, that is true, areas of corruption, education, free primary. Whenever in Kenya we know that when you hear the word free, then that is a gaping hole for the elites to loot. So free primary education was looted. But then the Kenyan system, I think the title that captured my thinking is political economy of exclusion. You know, the Liar told us the political economy is about the interaction between politics and economics. So is it those with political power, therefore are able to distribute economic resources, or is it those with economic resources are therefore able to influence access to political power? And therefore, the person talks about cyclic nature. It is cyclic. And that is where now the person falls at two ideas that influence the Kenyan system according to this theme, the topic, that partly ethnicity, we can see it. But underlying that, there is the idea of who has the resources to buy power. And I think that is the dynasty you brought. That sometimes I was reflecting in my mind and thought that to some level you may not condemn the immediate president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, and say he got power through ethnicity, he is a Kikuyu. But you may easily find that his access was more to do with the resources that he was controlling, built from the time that his father was the first president. So you find that there are two elements there, ethnicity and the power. And I think the person tries to bring that, to prove that relationship, in the sense that he's asking, as much as ethnicity is playing a role in distribution of power and economic opportunities, even appointments, there is a new trend in Kenya where, you know, we felt very happy. I think so, we were very happy to say, for the first time in Kenya, the discussion in elections is around economics, isn't it? Issues. We are not talking about ethnicity. And the structure of dynasty came in. But this foregoing election, in my own opinion, and reading, I think was an election that was heavily controlled by looted resources. Yes, we did say ethnicity, but it is who has what. We felt very happy to say, now we have new faces in parliament, but behind those people, you'll find that most of them have cases with the EAC and the rest, governors and the members of parliament. And the questions that Kenyans keep on asking themselves is, what will make a person who wants to be a member of parliament or a governor spend almost $1 billion? How will you recover that and your salary is not even a dot of what you have spent? So that one points a finger to something to do with the political economy, distribution of resources, and power. So you want power to distribute. In that case, I think the cyclic nature of politics and economics in Kenya is the one that you find now because of, somebody told us the tyranny of numbers, but I think it is a tyranny of ethnic numbers in Kenya, is the one that makes people now have control of power and therefore have resources. And in that case then, you ask yourself, where do the youth stand? Automatically, you know, naturally, even compared to your father, you know, you, because of age, you are still starting there. Unless you use a shortcut, you'll always be economically behind another person who has stayed more on earth. So then, if access to power, and therefore that access to power gives you access to economic abilities, is gotten through largesse that has been established, or your ethnicity, then the youth automatically are out of that number. And I think you are very right to focus it on exclusion of the youth. And the fear here, dear members, is that what has been organized with is that the song we have been singing, that our young people will be the ones to break ethnicity. We keep on saying that. They don't speak, even some of them don't speak. My children can't speak our ethnicity because of maybe intermarriages and the rest there. Generally, I saw somewhere there the report that the youths, if you listen to them, mostly is they do not wish to be engaged. They do not like ethnicity. But then the lucrative aspects around that is what drives them. You don't like it, but what do you see? Your friend because his father is from this ethnic group there, is accessing resources. Now in Kenya, you know, just you talked about the appointments. We are singing and saying a very young person has been appointed to a board somewhere. But you dig behind there, you find that there are connections that reek of ethnicity or the power to buy. And I think the implications of this, just to make it very fast, the implications of this, especially to the youth, is that there is poor, Winnie, you are talking about that, poor participation of youths in politics. And participation is not just voting. How many step forward to hold power? But it's not their wish. Very complicated criminal system, very complicated ethnic-driven system. You don't understand as a youth ethnicity, but then you are supposed to be participating in politics that is driven by that. You don't have resources, you're supposed to participate in politics that is driven by that. So this is very, I think, very, very relevant at this time to raise thoughts about that. I think also whenever we see my implication to the youth, I think of this marginalization is the fact that for Kenyan case, I think I now understand why we have organized criminal groups during elections driven by the youth. You know, you think of Chingororo or the rest, they are gangs everywhere. It's because of that their role is put somewhere there. Then another thing is that when we engage in this aspect of looking at this report, that the youth, actually the conclusion is that the youth are totally excluded from aspect of accessing public contracts and the rest because of their ethnicity and economic power. You find that this you call it what? This exclusion is what makes now the youth again recede into ethnic cocoons for them to be able to participate and also enjoy the services. So I think generally in the region, we are, I can say this, that I don't know whether it is Kenya, bad manners, but in the region we have regional organizations. But these regional organizations, I'm looking at, you know, as much as we talk of institutions, but what is the process of people getting to the institutions? So I'm looking at the process of people. I was looking at EALA, you know, East Africa Legislative Assembly, as one way in which we can be able to push this. But what is the process of people getting to that? The Kenyan case is that, again, ethnicity and dynasty should be the son of something like that there, in that case. But I think also, you look at the Kenyan case, you know, they flourish all those legal arrangements and the systems in place there for affirmative action for the youth. But still we go back to the issue of the role of, I think somebody talked about that, the role of parliament. The confluence between parliament and the executive has come out very well in this part there, especially in Kenya. Budgeted corruption. So again, you see that link coming together, and therefore continuously the youths are left out of the structure. And this, I think, is still a very difficult case within the East Africa region. Thank you very much.
I feel very helped by the panelists. I feel very helped by the panelists and how they have managed to unpack this, you know, study that, as Winnie Masai, our director, said, you know, took long, and now we feel that we have a report, we have a research report here that can influence policy, and I feel like many more people should have this report, and they should be helped by panelists like the ones we have to digest it and, you know, break it down, understand it, and be agitated, be energized to do something about our collective situation in the region. let's put our hands together for the panelists, because I think that collectively was a wonderful job. We want to make the next step and bring on board our keynote speaker, George Kegoro, before we invite a few questions from the members of the participants who are here. Very eloquent and very well-established people, but that is after we hear from George, our keynote speaker. You've listened, you've gone through the study, and you've heard the panelists. George, please welcome and take your minutes to help us digest this report further. Thank you so much. Please encourage him. I know he's not a politician, but no human being does not feel energized by that kind of an applause. George.
Thank you very much, Brother Cyprian, for the way you've steered the meeting. Thank you very much, Winnie and Information, for involving me with this. As I introduced, I come from the Open Society Africa. We used to be OCEA, but we merged into a larger entity now called Open Society Africa that then incorporates all the foundations that are part of the Open Society foundations. So we have one foundation across Africa that then I represent here today. We are very proud of the partnership that we've had with Information. We are proud of the cutting edge advocacy and the cutting edge activism that Information has been involved in, and really a note of salutation to Winnie for the way that she continues to imagine new ways of engaging with the issues that confront our region. Also compliments because of the regionalization of the conversation and the rich resources that are represented by the panelists, and listening to them and picking the commonalities across our region. That's really, it's nice to have these conversations regionalized, because the national struggles in each of the countries that are represented here are very identical, and when you have this kind of regionalized conversation, it brings out first the commonalities, but also there are subtle differences here and there, and also a realization that whatever any one of us is going through in their countries is exactly the same as the next country, and unless we have that kind of high level understanding, we are not going to have the necessary perspectives that are needed in, first of all, understanding what we are going through individually in the countries and what solutions are possible as a result of comparative information and a comparative and concerted approach to the issues that are confronted by each of the countries. So I've listened very keenly to the conversation, and my 2 cents is to these would be just sort of 2 stories that also help to bring the perspective to what we are talking about here. I was told by a Ugandan leader, friend of mine, about a meeting that President Museveni, General Museveni, as some people call him, convened early on in his presidency. This is a meeting that took place in the western part of Uganda, somewhere, and it was a meeting of people that Museveni regards as his core ethnics, and that definition is very variable. At some time this group is in, sometimes this group is out, depending on how high or low that identification is pitched. So that meeting took place early on in his presidency, and then Museveni delivered the key message, which was to the effect of and the people who attended the meeting came from Uganda itself, from Rwanda, from Tanzania, from Burundi, and from Europe and the Americas. These were his co-ethnics, whichever way they were defined. Sometimes the Chwezi identity, as we've seen recently, has been invoked. So I imagine that that is that was the organizing identity for that meeting. So Museveni told them that the reason why I've called you here today is, first of all, so that you know one another. As you've been dispersed, some of you live in Europe, some of you live in Tanzania, some of you live in Rwanda, some of you live in DRC, some of you live in Uganda, but you are the same people. So the first thing is so that you know each other, and so that you understand and appreciate that you may live in different geographies. Some of you have been forced into those geographies through political violence, through the refugees, and so on and so forth, but you're one people. So the first thing is to put a label that wherever you are one people. The second reason, my second message is because you face adversity, which has created all this dispersal across many geographies. You've lost land, some of you, as a result of the fact of being displaced. So because now I'm president, my message is, wherever you find yourself, settle down there and buy land. Settle down there and buy land. If you need help, first of all, form help among each other to buy land. And if you need help from the state, we will help you to buy land and settle where you are. That is my second message. The third message is, take your children to school. Education is the basis on which we will survive and continue to dominate. And I will help you to continue to do that, because now I'm president, I'm in place. So that was the message. And according to that analysis, and according to my source, who is a trusted senior Ugandan leader, that has been the key pursuit of the Museveni presidency in the last 40 years or so, to say, I am the president of Uganda on the face of it, but there is a subnational identity that I also represent, and with whom I have a different subnational understanding, that I will posture in a particular way when I'm speaking for Uganda, but there is also an inner play that is represented by that kind of thinking. And this speaks to what you are talking about, Mugisha, that if there is a group of people that are eating differently from how everybody else is eating, that have a special interest and a special relationship with the state, then that brings an included and excluded politics, and included and excluded dynamic that is very important for understanding all the conversations that have taken place in this today. My second story is what has happened here in Kenya recently. Kenya went into the 2007 election, but what had happened before 2007 is, to understand the violence of 2007, you go back to what happened in 2005. And to understand what happened in 2005, you have to go back to what happened in 2002 and how Kibaki came to power. So Kibaki comes to power in 2002. Who is the president of, who is the candidate for a group of people that came together to imagine a different way of organizing politics in Kenya from the way that Moi had organized politics. Moi had organized politics in a very out and out ethnic manner, and at the end of his power, he tries to hand over to Uhuru Kenyatta, but then he's outmaneuvered by this other group that sees Kibaki as the basis of a different type of organizing that is not ethnic in nature, that is pan-Kenyan, if I may use that word. But as soon as Kibaki takes power, an inner group that is ethnic in nature claims him exclusively from 2003 onwards. And the group that then ends up revolving around Odinga is one that is rebelling against the fact that Kibaki is immediately captured by a core ethnic group of the Mount Kenya group, or as the Mount Kenya Mafia, as it ended up being called. So the staging of the internal contest within NAC is the constitution-making process. We go into bombers, and one group walks out, and then we have the 2005 referendum, where the Kibaki group, the group that has captured Kibaki, is saying, we have Kibaki, we have the state, we will give you the constitution we want, because we have the state with us. This other group says you will actually not, and that is then we have the referendum where the contest takes place, and the Kibaki capturing group actually loses that referendum, and the power and the buoyance that the Odinga group has is what then takes them all the way to the 2007 election and the violence in 2007. That violence was an attempt to say that violence is a way of negotiating for power. People use violence to negotiate for power. So Odinga and his group are saying, you may have the state, but we have the people. And if you have the people, we will use the people against the state, and you can't kill all of us. And that is what explains the violence of 2007, that we, in our multitudes, will rise up against the state, and let's see what happens. So the Kibaki group, the group that had captured Kibaki from 2003 onwards, manages through very, very unlikely circumstances to actually retain Kibaki in power, despite the fact that many people believe that he had actually lost that election of 2007 by a landslide. So a small core ethnic group manages to keep Kibaki in power, and he stays on until 2013. And in 2013, we see Kenyatta take power. And how did Kenyatta come to take power? Kenyatta takes power riding on building his power base and his appeal around the fear of the ICC, but the fear of the ICC isn't projected as a personal fear only. It is also a fear of, it is also, he projects himself as, this ICC is not just coming for me, Uhuru Kenyatta, and William Ruto here. It's coming for us, the Kikuyus. He goes down to say, we are the ethnic group that brought us independence, that brought us the goodies of the new modern Kenyan state. They hate us here. They would have committed genocide on us in 2007. That is why you must trust me. You must give me the state. So that is how Kenyatta projects himself in 2013, and takes the state with Ruto until, for the next two election cycles. What has just happened in this last election? Preceding this last election, we had BBI. And my understanding of BBI is BBI was built on the memory of 2007. That if you've got that the power elites are careful not to allow that kind of ugly violence of 2007 to ever happen again. So BBI comes as an attempt to organize politics in such a way that ethnic stakeholders who are represented in BBI come together and say, we will create a tent so large that if you are not in this, and I mean, everybody in this tent is where the power is going to be. We are going to allocate the state among ourselves inside of this tent, and if you are not in it, then we are going to marginalize you so hard that you don't really matter. So when Ruto stays outside of that tent, the BBI people thought that they were going to marginalize him and actually pulverize him so badly that nothing outside of this tent will actually happen. And the reason why we want the power to be arranged inside this tent is so that we then manage to avoid violence. So BBI was an attempt to allocate Kenya among the people who are stable within BBI, to the exclusion of people who didn't come along, like Ruto, and then also then assure, first of all, you keep power, but secondly, you assure that you avoid the risk of violence as had happened in 2007. And they thought they had it. But we now know that outside of the big tent of BBI, Ruto was also organizing. How did Ruto organize? And that is a fascinating study that I think there has not been sufficient attention of how Ruto actually managed to take the state in this last election. This is my theory. BBI has a big tent. It's organizing. But what has happened in BBI is the Kikuyu inner group that was responsible for keeping Kibaki in power in 2007, bringing Uhuru into power in 2013, and maintaining him for the next 10 years, actually fractured. It fractured because of the illegitimacies that Kenyatta then developed, because Kenyatta then devoured that same power, that same group that had put him in power. He actually devoured their economic interests, because what the Kenyatta government for the 10 years represented was economic opportunity to the family, and only to the family, but also to the exclusion of the Kikuyu elite that had put him in power. So there was a huge economic fight between the Kikuyu elite on the one hand and the Kenyatta family. And that is why they were no longer willing to back him or to back his project of an Odinga presidency. So that fracturing of Kikuyu power created a vacuum. A small group was watching. This is my theory. And who is that small group? The Somali. So the Somali group then emerges for the first time as an ethnically coherent a group that has money, that also senses that there's an opportunity because there isn't an organized ethnic group that is capable of taking power in the next election. And that is the group that queues behind Ruto. If you go back to the Somali attempt to be in the state, it's got to be one of the fascinating stories. We've had censuses in this country that are botched up in northeastern Kenya. The Somali don't want their numbers to ever be known because their numbers are actually small. But they project they project a presence that is much larger than their numbers. That is one strategy. The second strategy is the Somali power barons have balkanized their people and excluded the rest of the country from participation in northeastern Kenya, and therefore using the Somali population as their bargaining chip. When we had that violence and the terrorism in Garissa, and the problem that it has created in the education system in northeastern, and I was working at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, I reached out to the Somali political leaders and told them, we need a conversation about education in northeastern, because the down country teachers are facing very, very serious problems. They can't stay. At the same time, there isn't a sufficiently trained local teachers to assume education responsibilities. They are hostile to that conversation. The Somali leaders don't want Somali people to be educated, because that education liberates them from the yoke that those leaders have over them, and you need that yoke so that you can use them intact to bargain for political power. But you also need to project numbers larger than they have, because then you are able to say, for us, because this is what we bring, this is what we're entitled to. So that is the game that has been going on, I think, around the Somali community. So for the Somalis, there is also there are many narratives about. So part of how this game then happens, the way Kenyatta created his narratives about what the Kikuyus represent in this country, there are also narratives about who the Somalis are, the deep-seated fears about what Somali power represents in terms of Kenyan politics. So that is part of what has been on negotiation. On the one hand, you hold the people and you use what has happened is the Somali leaders have actually used violence, terrorism, to keep everybody else out of northeastern province, and then they have undermined the possibility of education to continue holding onto the power that they have over those people, their own people, so that then they use them as a bargaining chip. But what has happened for the first time is you have an organized Somali elite, very similar to a very organized Kikuyu elite that has been evident in the Kenyatta and the Kibaki presidencies, that has brought political financing that then is responsible and explains to a very significant extent how Ruto has come to power. So it is still a developing story for me, but it is a story that needs a little more debate and a little more conversation to understand what is happening in the country. So why do all these things happen? Whether they're in Somalia, whether they are in Ethiopia, whether they're in Uganda, and whether they're in South Sudan, why do people organize politics in this way that we are describing here? I think the first reason is that there is a decline in central control of the state in all our countries. What the state is supposed to do, which is the guarantor of security, the guarantor of development, the guarantor of all the aspirations of that citizens have, that has been in decline. and there's also coming with that decline is a decline in legitimacy. So the state, because of how the people who end up leading it are selected or how they emerge, they come with challenges or to their own legitimacy. So populations crave for alternatives to the state, which for those reasons is seen as illegitimate. And what then emerges is a construction of alternative governance structures. And those alternatives are usually created along identity lines, whether ethnic or religious, but it is usually along the attempt is to then supplant or replace the state by organizing differently. So you have sub-state organization that represents the fact that we can't rely on the state because it's not working for us. And in that organizing, that is how then people access the rent, the way that you've been describing here all morning. And if necessary for that organization to be achieved, violence will also be used to ensure that that new form of organizing is actually established. The other point to make is that the alternative governance structures represent the real power in many areas with control of economic resources. So you will have the state that's the routines of there's a national budget and so on and so forth. There is a national aspiration, but the real structures that work on the ground are the ones that have been created through these alternatives. These alternative governance structures offer security and stability at local levels. That is why people want them. If you go to northeastern that we've described, the people will be told, if you don't want it this way, then you'll be bombed next day, or something terrible is going to happen to you. So the fact that this thing is seen to work, it offers alternatives that people can identify with. And from time to time, you'll be given a shiny new road, the kind that both Kibaki and Kenyatta have done. So if you see Central Kenya, for example, it's got a very, very well-developed road infrastructure and shiny new objects, because then the rents must be seen. You've supported us. In return, we're giving you these things because it's a quid pro quo process. So that, I think, is the analysis of what has happened. And you've also talked about the role of the youth. The youth are foot soldiers in the perpetration of violence. They are also used to justify and explain these alternative ways of organizing. But when it is necessary, they are also crushed, because when their own expectations are unmet and cannot be met, then they will usually also be crushed. You remember what happened to Mungiki? Mungiki were used in a particular political season. The next political season, they were hunted down into smithereens, and that is how this system ordinarily works. So what do we do going forward? I think the first thing is to understand that how politics is organized and why it is organized that way, and also to sort of pick apart the constituent parts and demonstrate with as much evidence as possible what is motivating that form of organizing. The second thing, and this is my last point, is there is no alternative to the long back and very painstaking and back-breaking work of making the state work. If the state can't work for all of us, then all these subnational ways of organizing that are based on manipulation, that are based on violence, that are based on exclusion, that becomes the alternative. In the long run, it never gets any of us to go as far as we want to go. And we can't have the state working for all of us unless we make elections meaningful. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. I was very, very keen to hear your theory, and that a certain state, and you gave the theory as to why electoral reforms were not possible before the last general election, and I think that theory has been tested and proved to be right. So I am very keen to track this theory and test it and see if it is it's actually true. So thank you very, very much for that excellent exposition on the theme that we are dealing with. Actually, James requested that we call it democratic governance, conflict and exclusion, and I think there was no opposition to that proposal. So we are with it. We have expanded it to mean democratic governance, conflict and exclusion in Africa, and we have been told that it is how politics is organized in that country and how that affects the effectiveness of the state, which George Kegoro calls making the state to work, which James said it is to have effective state institutions. So this is the challenge, which the corruption from this award of tenders and contracts and appointments, which is ethnic based, but also we were told that it is also who has the money, and then the international connection was brought in, and then we were told that constitutions may be good, but they do not actually guide how things are done on the ground. Here in Kenya we say things on the ground. You know, this is what Mliro was telling us, that the situation in terms of what is provided for in the Constitution and what ends up happening are two different things. And George is now telling us very deep stories about how communities in the Ugandan situation were meeting to plot how to hold on to power for a long period of time. George, has there been any Kalenjin meeting somewhere? Or Kikuyu? I need to know. I mean, somebody needs to, Muliro, probably you need to research whether there was a Kikuyu meeting somewhere, you know. Actually, Kawive may be the best one for that. There's a time he raised this conversation in 2017 and it was, you know, a lot of venom came his way. You may need to now finally research whether these meetings were held and what did they say. Because I know that the Somali one, George, did happen. And there's a strategy called the Somali 2040 strategy, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much. Why don't we appreciate George for that excellent exposition. I mean, it's very difficult to summarize the wealth of perspectives that are coming forward from each of the panelists and the key speakers. So we are going to, because if we go to the question and answer session, we will have to close. The time is really, you know, very spent, as you would acknowledge. But we are going to take a 4-minute clip, which Fabian promises me that it will be very brief. And then we will have about, you know, 10 minutes of interaction with the questions, the panelists, and then we will close. So we are basically at the tail end of this conversation. Why don't we take it, Fabian?
not being considered so far. They are being undermined. There's a building where they can, regardless of their politics.
Kama vijana hawako katika ile meza, tuseme katika bulana, lazima pale inclusion yao itakuwa ndio maana unapata vijana wanafanya vitu vyao tu hata kwa ya vijana kupata hizo tenda, ndio maana unapata anafanya vitu vya
our leaders are listed in their proxies names. These are the youths who have used formality to gain interest into accessing this opportunity, which was promulgated
kabisa. Unapata kama unaweza enda
sasa kama vijana hawako katika ile
kuna mjalote na ukisi utapewa
ya kupeana, lazima pale inclusion yao itakuwa kidogo sana. Hakutakuwa na nguvu ya vijana kupata hizo tenda, ndio maana unapata
information huko
ya mtaani.
Ipiti normal wakabiliana na yani information anani na huyo people.
Majority of these know how the whole tendering process and also around that way you find that like the procurement officers who are supposed to offer 10 opportunities, and these young people miss out on them because they don't have capital that is required to be able to tenders and even go about the whole tendering process.
Kosa kuwa na ukaribu na anayepeana tenda hizo kazi, hana ukaribu, hamjui. Ukifika pale anakuuliza wewe ni wa nani, umetokea wapi, mimi sikujui, lazima nikujue ndio nikupe hii kazi.
Corruption saigile inakujia au watu nataka mwanabiashara kiwango kubwa, na hatujafikia kiwango kama hiyo.
Sisi kama walemavu kuna watu wanaregister vikundi yao na anachiita kama disability, lakini in the real sales sio hao wenyewe wanapata pesa, lakini sio sisi. Mwingine anakulia china yetu kama walemavu apewe kazi na anapewa hizo ma contract, anapewa hizo 30%. Sasa hakuna.
The future is for the youth, but the youth do not get the opportunity to make money or to what's the old are there always to make money, to favor their families, to favor their friends, left languishing in poverty.
Kama hujasoma vizuri ama una masomo hujahitimu vizuri, ndio kupata tenda ina mambo na wadau hujasoma lakini kazi ya
wenyewe wanapata pesa, lakini sio
even the women, youth, people living with disability, all those people play a big role, and they are supposed to, they have a right to access the government contracts. So it's a challenge, and it is a challenge because these people, these segmentation groups perish because they don't have the knowledge, so they don't have that morale to fight for their rights.
Constitution that we are having, it dictates inclusion of ethnicity, women, youth, people living with disability. All those people play a big role, and they are supposed to, they have a right to access the government contracts. So it's a challenge, and it is a challenge because these people, these segmentation groups perish because they don't have the knowledge, so they don't have that morale to fight for their rights.
youth and they are being underling by they cannot do anything so far regardless of the potentiality.
Jana ile meza tuseme katika ile table ya kupea, lazima pale inclusion yao itakuwa kidogo. Hakuna nguvu ya vijana kupata hizo tenders, ndio maana unapata vijana wanafanya vitu vyao tu vya mtaani.
In their proxy, these are the youths who are being used as a formality to gain interest into this
arrangement. Otherwise, the people who access are those ones who have the money.
this 30% which was
I want to request, even as we now move towards the conclusion, I want to come in front. I want to request George to come.
Kama unapata kwa hiyo ofisi yote na wewe ni kama ukienda huko priority.
Naweza kuwa hata niko na wakati ya information huko nimepata iti wale wenye watakuwa nao
approach the chair.
Gana ndio ndio kasi. Yani bibi tunaletea plus mimi ya huyo bibi kwa
Majority of know how this goes, so they tend to miss out on, and a lot of corruption. Find that like the procurement officers who are supposed to issue these tenders tend to take opportunities, and these young people don't see because they don't even have the tool that is required to be able to process even go about the whole tender process.
Changa kama vile mtu mwenyewe kwa na ukaribu tenda hizo kazi hana ukaribu mjukana na kuuliza wewe ni wapi, mimi sikujui, lazima nikujue ndio nikazi.
Corruption sasa kujua kuna ile anataka mwanadamu kuwe na biashara kiwango kwa sisi youths hatujafikia kama hiyo
kama walemavu kwa na register vikundi yao na kama in the real sales.
So now I want to invite Winnie Masai to hand over the report to the guest, the chief, Speaker George Kegoro, as a sign of making the report now available to all of us. And then after George receives that report, I'll give Winnie a copy, and then all of them will lift the report as a way of launching it. So why don't we take over from there? Let me give you a mic.
I've been given this task of handing this report to you, much on behalf of Open Society, and continue the good work. Thank you.
Yes. Don't receive it too quickly. Yes. Can we? Yes. Very good. Very good. It is now handed over. Thank you so much. Let's clap, please. Here is your copy now. So now I am requesting that they lift their copies. Don't cover your faces. Just lift it up to your chest level. If you can see that. And on the count of 1, 2, and 3, George, can you declare this report launched?
It is my pleasure now declare the report officially launched.
Thank you so much. Asante sana. Thank you so much. We can now take our seats. The report is now officially launched, and we now want to take just a few minutes. If there are a few of us in the audience, and we may want to make a comment or two. The talking has been happening a lot from the panelists, but now we are opening it up for all of us to make comments or ask questions. If you are having a question, please tell us who you are directing the question to. Yes, I see Sharon. Yeah, Sharon, you will be the first one. There is the professor behind you. I didn't get his name. Sorry? Zebi. Very good. Zebi will be number 2. Gabriel from South Sudan will be number 3. Let me start with the 3 and see if we are going to take another round of comments and questions. Please start us off, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Cyprian. My question was directed to George. Unfortunately, he has left, but maybe one of the members in the panel or Cyprian, you can answer on his behalf or Kawive. And I usually feel as though I can listen to George Kegoro and Uncle Richard, who I used to work with at OSF, the whole day, because they have so much information and there's so much you can learn from them. And so the question I was meaning to ask is, then how do we make elections more meaningful, especially in Kenya? Because as the youth, we are quite disenfranchised at this point, especially after what happened in just this recent elections in 2022. Is there hope really? Can we have a candid conversation? Because is there then any point of voting if we're saying that there is a state behind the state, the shadow state or the deep state? Thank you.
That one, Kawive will handle. Yeah, thank you so much. Zebi?
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Zebi, as you said, from YESA. So thank you very much for the presentation and the insight that you've shared. So my question is very simple. There is in the recommendation, I really liked the recommendations that were given out, but then I would want to understand, there was that aspect about empowering the youth politically. How does it look like empowering youth politically? Because I was also trying to reflect that in Parliament, we have certain positions that ideally they are supposed to be for youth. Nominated members of Parliament in Senate. I think we have 2, male and female. The same with the county assemblies. So how does it look like basically to empower youth? Because if I was to ask in this room, how many people know the current nominated member of Parliament currently? Someone can name for me any. The current nominated member of Parliament who is a youth in Kenya. His or her name? Okay, nice. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much. So that one is a challenge. How do we get to empower basically? Then number 2, the other question is, other than just considering that person, because we are not just looking at one person, but how can we expand that? Then my second question is about the issue about that category. Still in the recommendation, there was a recommendation it should be in the report where they categorize these male and female, the people that have been appointed to public office. When we have that youth category, is it possible then also for those names to be published for us to know that this number of youth have been appointed? Because I just feel having youth, 20 of them, it's not enough. So perhaps getting to know even their names could be an inspiration, maybe an inspiration to other youth, because those youth can be used as people to inspire or rather empower the youth to go for those positions and to understand the journey on how to get those positions, especially nominated members of parliament. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Zebi. Let me trouble the Daya with that one. Let's reflect on how we can deal with this question of meaningful young people's participation in not just the political process, but also in the economic activities of our countries. Now that we see how the allocation of resources and opportunities is so skewed, a comment from the DAI would be great. Let's go to Gabriel.
Thank you, Reverend. My name is Gabriel Dak Both. I'm from South Sudan, and I'm representing South Sudan Community Forum. It's a community-based organization here in Nairobi. First, I want to express my gratitude to the team for organizing this educative sessions. I have learned a lot. I've also met people that meeting online, people like George. I have a lot of his pieces in the dailies. I'm grateful that I've met him. Having said that, I wanted to also thank the panel for a very elaborative analysis of the situation we're handling. My questions are two. One is we've talked of the concept of state capture, so on and so forth. I wanted to ask, and before I ask that, I wanted to express my disappointment on this continued rise of nepotism, because the war in Sudan for us has become a blessing in disguise, because we flew to East Africa and then eventually got educations. And what our people used to tell us was that when we get educations, we are likely to be united, we are likely to love each other, we are likely to share our resources. But then we continue to see that even countries that are inspirational to us, countries like Kenya, countries like Ethiopia, that have had good educations, we continue to see them growing in the past that we are told to leave, like nepotism. The universities we are in, even the university school, we continue to see nepotism being practiced, you know, and people continue to organize themselves based on ethnic backgrounds. What is the problem? How can education assist us in handling this issue? It's a question, because, and the other question is, what is the concept of government in our African languages or in our African ethnic group? What's the concept of government? Our late leader, some of you know, Garang, give a concept of government as a heap of resources where people loot from. Definition of a government. So, what is really our concept of government in our various languages? What is a government? When we talk of government, what do we expect from it? I think I will end from there. I've taken quite long. But I think before I end, I wanted to say that I am from these two ethnic groups that have been mentioned, the Dinka and the Nuer. So I belong to the Nuer. And the reason why I'm bringing this point is I appreciate what Mogisa has said, who came from the Museveni's tribe. I also came from the tribe where Machar come from. But there's a dispute in South Sudan as to which tribe is the majority. We've never had a census where we can really know statistically that this tribe or this tribe that is the majority. So there's this contestation, and I believe my brother James will also attest to this. We've never had a census. It's one thing that the government of South Sudan has failed to do. So there's this, you know, the government in the north at that time used to be bribed to increase the number of certain communities and so on and so forth. But what is true is that in any government institution today, you will find the Dinka the majority. You can start, if you want to do your research, you start from the members of our members here. So majority, I think 70% are from one tribe. That is it. But that is not to say that they are the majority. So it is a question in dispute. What I'm saying is that I come from the Nuer tribe and the region and the constituency where the Vice President Dr. Riek Machar comes from. And in that state, which Cyprian has visited, Unity State, in our earlier conversation said he has visited Unity State. That state is the oil producing state. It is the state where the oil, which James has said, 90% of the oil, of government revenue come from the oil. It is, the oil we are talking about is, extracted from my state. But in that state, there are no roads. There's no standard high schools. There's no standard hospitals. You get this? So I am bringing this to give consensus to what Richard says, that sometimes these people uses us, but they give this to people that kept them in power. So that is a statement that can enable us to exonerate our tribes, like Kikuyus, the Kalenjin, who are also my tribe in one way or the other. And sometimes let us not victimize them. Let us victimize the heroes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Richard, thank you so much. Richard, please apply yourself to this particular question in terms of what is to be done if we are going to deal with this state capture, the nepotism, and the ethnic, the ethnic capture, the ethnic elite capture of the state, and the way the incompetence, is expressed as we have seen it in our countries. So I'm sure that Richard Mugisha will apply himself to that particular question. Let's start the responses from Kawive. Kawive, you remember the question that was posed by Sharon, and I am very confident that you will shed light on what is to be done to help with these elections. Is it even worth being involved in?
I think Sharon and Nea, but the point is, maybe just to throw it back to us, do we have elections in Kenya? No, we don't. We have selections. So it is increasingly clear to me that we've lost the democracy project. At least we have hit a dead end. And therefore, for me, when the youth say they would participate, when they ask you, you guys have voted for how many years, what change have you ever brought, they are right. Because being involved in elections has increasingly become like a ritual, a 5-year ritual. Every 5 years, go dance around, the politicians dance around us, and then, they are selected either by Vifara. Let them not put off my mic. Either by Vivaranga via computer.
When you go to the Vivaranga, what happened?
So either there are systems, there are mechanisms that have been put in place by these political actors that ensure either which way they are going to be elected. I think the worst happened in 2007, and from then it has been repeat after repeat. So being disheartened, I think for me going forward is we have to reboot the whole electoral system. We have to rethink how we get our leaders. Elections is clearly not helping us. So we have to get a way of how to get leaders, because changing the law is the same guys who will change the law. If you put new commissioners in the IEBC, they will be captured, they will be controlled from some space. Do you know the same people who were organizing politics at the national level in 1992? You count them. Ruto, Wetangula, Raila, Kalonzo. The only person who died is Moi. And Uhuru was not there that time. He came around 2002. It's the same guys with Mudavadi there. It's the same guys who are organizing the politics in 2022. How many years are those? 30 years? Are we incapable of getting new people? It means there's something wrong with the system. So we need to reboot that. And my challenge is to young people. They should show us the way. We have not been able to find that way. So they should come up with a way instead of complaining and saying we won't get involved. Because somehow we have to get leaders. So they should come up with a way and help us get that way of how we get our new leaders. Elections don't help us. There are no elections actually. There are only elections. Thank you.
Yeah, Sharon, now you get the feedback. I think the task is bigger than we thought. Let's go to the Daya on the reflection that the batteries are.
For me is so how can we use our local resources both politically and economically to benefit young people. I look at it with on a number of layers. So the first question is the ownership of public policy really matters when it comes to creating opportunities for youth. So I look at our education system, which determines our labor. Then we look at our employment opportunities in different industries. And then we have this productive sector that the youth can be integrated into. I think when it comes to public policy and youth, most countries in Africa, because they don't own as much resources to determine such big policies, they usually copy policies that are determined by their donors. So there is a certain view in Africa that primary education is important, and then secondary school it's important, but after that it's a luxury. Unless you're rich, you're connected, and it's really important. Going to higher education and specialization is actually a rare thing. So, which is the opposite for Africa. I think we need as much educated youth, specialized youth as much as possible that can contribute to the productive sector. So it's very important to include youth and employment opportunities and integrate them into the productive system within the economic structure. So right now what governments are doing is, elections are coming up every 5 years. They have to respond, to immediate issues related to the youth. So they give short-term favors in order to gain their support every 5 years. The long-term thinking in the politics and the economy does not exist, because everyone is worried about securing the next election and the next place within their political office. So I think it's very important to detach major human rights or major basic services from identity and ethnicity issues, including education, health, and basic services, so that those who access them, or those who are giving political support just to access the basics of their human right, don't have to think about that. And this starts with reviewing, the structure in our economies and why we're making those policies. I see that differently, because in Ethiopia we are coming out now from a very state-dominated economy, and at least there's an attempt now, to bring in a private sector, to bring in other actors. But I also see that heavily that our policies are not ours, and they're not made, for our country. They're made somewhere else based on a different ideology, and then they come to our country and they're just copy-pasted. And then the problem is never the policy. The problem is the people. It's either your ethnicity, it's either where you're located, it's because you don't have a resource. There's a rare discussion about the contextualization and the localization of these policies. So when we're thinking about youth, I think it's very important to do a very contextual analysis of what is important in that specific country. You know, the mean average age in Ethiopia, if I'm not wrong, is 20. That means, you know, less than 60% of our population is under 35. So Ethiopia is a very young population. Creating jobs is not an option, it's a must. Unless you do, you have that ticking bomb that we just talked about on your hands. And these young people are going to ask you, you know, for jobs, and they will do anything. So they are susceptible to, you know, elite buy-in. They are susceptible to, political exclusion. So whether you like it or not, you need to create both a political and economic interest that keeps the youth productive. And right now, I don't think our economies and the way our politics is set up is actually catering to that. So the most simplistic example is this is happening to you because you are from this specific ethnic groups, which fails to analyze a bigger structural problem that exists within these economies. So ethnic federalism is supposed to empower young people, speak their language, they can stay in any access jobs. If that system is, question should be, what part of it should we change so that it can respond to that? So yes, youth policy, participation, governance, those are just very elusive terms. What do those mean in the everyday lives of, young people? So, you have a young man, he's up and coming, he wants to get resources, start a family, he wants a stable life, or she wants a stable life. Happen for young people. So we need to approach this in a very systematic way, unpacking the layers of both the political and the economic side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is where James was saying that civil society organizations need to be resourced and given capacity to handle this heavy work of agenda setting based on evidence. And you can see that to even produce this kind of evidence for advocacy, it requires a lot. But when you look at the kind of resources and capacity that is available to civil society organizations, then you wonder if they can even be heard, even be invited to the table where policy and solutions are being discussed. Thank you very, very much. Now, Mugisha, you heard what was canvassed, by Gabriel, mainly talking about this state capture and I hope that you don't end up where Kawive ended, that there's no hope with elections. I hope that somewhere you will give us hope that something can be done to handle this state capture, because unless we deal with it, we can't even handle the elections, we can't even handle our economy, we can't even provide long-term solutions to our young people and our countries. So what do we do now?
Can I request that I move that side? I think there are people here. So someone mentioned my name. She knew me and I can't see her. There must be other people that... Thank you. Yeah. I know I can exchange chairs for a short time. Yeah, thank you very much. That is a powerful question. You come from South Sudan, yeah, but all of us really, it concerns us. This is how we were structured at formation. There is a tribe that participated in colonial rule, and there's a tribe that was punished. The ones who resisted were crushed. The ones who collaborated were empowered. So even Ethiopia that was not colonized, they keep saying Ethiopia was not colonized. But for some reason, after our independence, Ethiopia took on ethnic politics as well, surprisingly. So there's one big failure in state building, which is how do different groups that existed as nations come together today as one nation. So the bigger problem there is independence. I guess between us, between our tribes as a continent, I don't know how many groups we are, we have a solution. Because what is common about us? Now, that is never promoted at a political level. What is promoted, the old divide and rule is still promoted today. Now, the second element is the question of resources. One, we can't unite as just between Dinka and Nu. Just have peasants on both sides. It really doesn't matter who a Dinka is, and there's a small group at the top between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir. These guys are fighting for power, then the rest, nothing. Okay? So for me, there is something, if you allow me, Nkrumah, remember Nkrumah, and the death, people listen to me, Kwame Nkrumah and the death of the African intellectual leader. There is no African country where the original intellectual leader was not murdered. You go to any country, I think we start with Patrice Lumumba. And Nkrumah was writing from exile around 69. He come.
Musha, come here so that you conclude for me.
So, when Nkrumah was writing from exile, he counted military coups in 1969. They were about 10. So you kill an intellectual head of state, you replace him with a soldier as a head of state across Africa. Even Robert Mugabe was not supposed to be the head of state, by the way. There are other people in Zimbabwe who would have become heads of state. Those were killed before Zimbabwe became independent. So the whole idea of Lancaster House negotiations, they eliminated the right leaders and we stayed with mediocres. Yes, let me tell you, this is serious. You are not going to solve this problem unless we address it. So today, the other factor is, someone mentioned it here, I don't know who it was, I think someone from Kenya. There's a group, an ethnic group, that is commercially connected. For me, with the World Bank, with foreign finance, but operating locally in East Africa. He said Asians of Asian origin or something like that. Somali. So in every country, in Uganda, a professor has just released a book, is Uganda an Indian colony? So the trader who can go to UK and borrow money at negative interest rate, then he comes here to trade in Uganda. And he's the favorite of the president. And he quoted Gupta, the state capture by very powerful traders. So there are layers. There are layers of power between the politics and economics, the businessmen and the politicians inside the country and outside the country, who wants to utilize ethnicity. You know, Museveni wouldn't be anywhere if he didn't manipulate ethnicity. He would be nobody because of the majority. You get the majority of the ethnic group in Uganda, this majority, has never had a president for 2 years. Do you see? So I'm giving you a lot of things here, just tips. And so what do we need to do? There is a problem with elections, and it goes back to for me, we have to deal with those concepts again and understand them. Neoliberalism. When I say I'm the rights holder, I have rights, and you are my head of state, and I tell you, you are the duty bearer. I have to hold you accountable. Is it true? This guy speaks to Bill Gates. He gets a lot of money from Bill Gates to do a grow whatever chemical biotechnology in my country. Now, and I'm here saying that you account to me. The guy laughs at me. I tell you, Museveni despises all his ministers. He doesn't respect all the MPs. He respects nobody. Why? We don't have power, and he understands it. Power comes from up. So all these elections he is doing, he's just doing plastic surgery. He's manipulating us. He gives us nothing. So this era is coming to an has actually come to an end. The invasion of Ukraine, Putin has just put a stop to the rubbish. I'm sorry. Putin he says, I don't trust the Americans because they have proved that they are not trustworthy. What is missing in the picture is Africa. So if there is this whole Asian unity, Russia, China, the Middle East, India on one side, America and Europe on the other side, what about us? The world is realigning. And we are quiet waiting for the winner, so we follow them again. So they continue dividing us. So at the African Union level, Africa should be having its own agenda. One, we don't want debt. Debt slavery is also slavery. If we fought slavery, we also have to fight the debt slavery. That's how we get impoverished. That's how young people are poor. That's why young people don't have a future. Because every money we collect, Museveni is very clear. He calls his Minister of Finance, he calls his head of Revenue Authority, the body that collects taxes. He says, do you have money for my defense? The minister says, yes. Do you have money for the donors to pay back the debt? If they say yes, then Museveni goes home, gets a good sleep. So we don't want debt. Two, we don't want this scare of nuclear. The other one has nuclear, this one has nuclear. They are going to bomb the world. And we suffered in the middle. So there is a possibility now of Africa leading the non-aligned movement. Non-aligned, we are not for US, we are not for Russia, we are not for China either. We want to stand on our own. Why? Because we have our minerals. Look at Zambia, again copper. Look at Congo, look at South Sudan. So we need to put terms on our own resources. Okay? And then the world will begin to respect us. I think South Africa needs to take a lead on that continental level, not just to sit here and wait for the winner. Thank you.
Maybe we should start by influencing the winner himself. You will agree with me that we've done justice. We've done justice to the subject that brought us here, and so that I don't lose anybody, because time is much spent. I want to bring the meeting to an end. Munira, is there something that I've left out, or I can now go to the closing remark and a vote of thanks? And I want to request my dear Winnie Wanjala to step forward and help us with the closing remarks. And I think we will close the meeting at that stage, having successfully unpacked the report and launched it. And interacted with it. It has given us ideas, and we know what we need to do moving forward, including very provocative and very bold calls from Mugisha on us not sitting back and waiting for the winner, but we can be able to have an agenda of our own as Africa. So thank you very much. Join me to invite Winnie to give us the closing remarks.
Thank you so much. It was a very, very, very informative, interactive session, very lively. Hata nimeona like that time has just gone so fast. Huh? So many thanks for each of you who has taken time to join us. There were some online participants. Thank you so much also from joining us from the counties, Mashinani, although we never got to hear their voices, but I think from the film we were able to see what is happening Mashinani in terms of youth and access to tenders. Thank you for the participants who are here. We really appreciate you for taking some time off from your work to be part of us. We are left with a challenge as youth organizations. I don't know whether we had this information that is in the report. So it is for us to take this information and pack it. Thank you, panel. You have made it so easy for us. You know, sometimes when you see an academic report, you're telling yourself, I cannot read the whole document. I think you've made it so easy for us to be able to even talk about countries that we've never been to and get similarities, contrast the differences. So thank you so much for unpacking for us. It makes it easier for us as youth-led organizations, organizations that work with youth, organizations that advocate for youth rights, to go out there and spread the message, come up with strategies to be able to address the issues that have been raised. 30%, it's a given. Do we take it? Things we need to ask ourselves and come up with ways of making sure that we take our rights. Martin Luther King says, nobody will give you justice, you do what? You take it. So maybe that is the only way out. Thank you for our donors who are able to, Open Society Foundation, who enabled us to take this study. There was also a technical reference committee that really held our hand as an organization. This was a very new area for us. We fumbled a lot, but we got a lot of guidance from them. Now we have the baby of all that hard work, which is this report. So thank you for even the staff for working with the country researchers and making this study possible. For the crew that is here that has enabled us to stream this live, Ifian, thank you also for making time to steer this conversation in the right direction. I appreciate everyone who took their time to be here. And we have a gift pack. It was on each seat. Please do not leave yours behind. I know men don't like carrying bags, but this one we tried to make it a bit and friendly even for the men. Please do not leave it behind. There's some information there. Yeah. So thank you so much. And lunch, I'm sure all of us have gotten the mail cards. Yeah. So maybe we are closing. Are we closing with the anthem or we are just closing the needs? Oh. Yeah. Yeah.